Welcome to the 517 In Your Business podcast. Here's your host, Mary Guida.
Welcome back to the 517 In Your Business podcast. This is an interesting topic today, and one that I was struck when I read what we were talking about today, because most of us share the road with semi-trucks every single day. I've had my own experience with an accident. They deliver the products we buy. They support businesses all over the region. They keep our economy moving. But when a crash from a commercial truck happens, the consequences are much more serious than a typical car accident. And so today, the goal of this podcast is to talk about why semi-truck accidents are different, what Michigan drivers need to know about sharing the road safely with these large commercial vehicles, and why the crashes are way more complex than people realize. So joining me is attorney Stephen Sinas from Sinas Dramis law firm. Steve, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me again.
Stephen, why is this an important topic for Michigan drivers?
So our firm has been doing personal injury work for over 75 years. And when you do this line of work, you represent people who've been injured in all types of different situations. And our firm has handled numerous semi-truck accident cases over the years, and we've come to learn how different they are than a typical auto accident. And so we want to have the viewers understand why they're different and the unfortunate circumstance where they or a loved one or a friend is injured in a semi-truck accident, and they can understand why it's so important to pursue your rights and why those rights are unique and what these cases are all about. I'll also add that I think it's interesting to learn about the world around you. And so when you are driving through our community here in Lansing, when you're sharing the highway with a semi-truck, I would think that many people don't quite understand what would happen if something were to occur and a crash occurred between them and the semi-truck. So, regardless of whether you have an injury case or not, I would hope that this episode's interesting to the viewers.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me, and we'll get into why later, but it raises a really important question. What is it about semi-truck crashes that make the injuries so severe?
So one thing I try to remind people about any type of vehicle accident is that if you really think about it, what we're doing when we're putting ourselves in vehicles is we're putting our bodies into these metal traveling vehicles that are going at times extremely fast. And that's why such severe injuries can occur in any type of vehicle situation. But when the vehicle that you're in, or perhaps even worse, the vehicle that hits you, is not just 4,000 pounds, not just 6,000 pounds, but say 80,000 pounds, the type of damage and destruction that can happen is just catastrophic. And so it really kind of does come down to physics, so to speak, in the sense that these vehicles are so big, so powerful, that they really it just changes the outcome of what happens in a crash. And that includes severe injuries. I've had a number of clients who, been injured in a semi-truck crash, and you can just look at what happened to them and just see that the force involved is the reason why they have so many broken bones, why their bodies are so disfigured, and why the injuries are so catastrophic. And it's heartbreaking when you see those people. But that's really I think the fundamental reason why these cases are so much more significant than your typical rear-end vehicle crash case.
Right. So I imagine a lot of people assume that, an accident is just an accident, but that's not what we're talking about here. Let's talk about what makes a semi-truck accident different from your typical car accident.
Yeah, so there's a standard called negligence, and negligence is a central principle that applies to personal injury cases. And it's a pretty simple concept. It says that you need to use reasonable care when you're doing things. And so negligence applies to us when we're using our vehicles, driving our vehicles. And, in a standard vehicle injury case, you're looking at what the drivers did and whether they used reasonable care. And that is the focus of your standard motor vehicle versus motor vehicle accident case. With a semi-truck, though, most semi-trucks are governed by federal law because they're interstate trucking. And if they're not, Michigan has incorporated the federal motor carrier standards into its own law. And so there's a whole different set of rules that applies to these truck drivers and the truck companies. So when you're looking at liability, negligence is still a focus and is really kind of the ultimate primary focus of the case. But how you show they were negligent and how you are able to show the standards and rules they violated, it all comes from the fact that these trucks are subject to a whole different rule book than a typical motorist.
You mentioned federal regulations, and it's something a lot of drivers probably don't even think about. So what kind of rules are there that govern this industry, the trucking industry?
Yeah, well, there's a whole big book. It's called the Federal Motor Carrier Regulations, and it has all types of rules and standards that apply to truck companies and how their drivers need to operate their vehicles. It includes how drivers need to be trained. It includes standards about driver fatigue and making sure that truck drivers aren't driving too many hours on the road. And it obviously includes all types of standards about how truck drivers need to operate their trucks. So it's extremely dense rule book that takes a long time to even get your mind around the first time. And then every time we litigate one of these cases, we have to delve further into those regulations and see how they apply to our given case. But it's fascinating to understand the extensiveness of these regulations. Most people have no idea how extensive they are.
I'm sure. And that also will affect, who may be responsible when a crash happens. I think a lot of people will just think that, oh, the truck driver is the only person who can be responsible. But I'm guessing that's not always true.
It's definitely not true. And one of our jobs as lawyers handling these cases, we have to analyze obviously what the driver did wrong in operating the truck, but then we have to investigate further to understand who the trucking company is, who owned the truck. Sometimes the entity that employs the driver doesn't actually own the truck. Sometimes the truck is owned by a different entity than the trailer. Sometimes you can have theories that the company involved with loading the cargo on the truck could be held liable depending on how the crash occurred. There are companies that might be involved with the maintenance of the truck that maybe didn't do their job. So the list goes on in terms of potential defendants when you're looking at a trucking case. So it is certainly not just, okay, we're going to bring a claim against the driver. It's a much more involved analysis that in many of our cases has really made a real big difference for our clients because we're able to show that liability does extend to just more than one party or two parties, and then that enhances our ability to obtain a meaningful result for our clients.
Very complex. Let's talk about what actually causes many of these crashes and what some of the most common factors you see in truck accident cases.
Well, I'll just say to the listeners out there, one thing that we all can do to avoid semi-truck crashes is when we are around a semi-truck, be extra vigilant and careful. I see drivers, just in my own personal experience, and we've screened cases where the driver was the one who wasn't using reasonable care, or the driver could have done some things differently. So just in terms of my interest in protecting the public, I would say to you and your family members, especially your younger drivers, when you're coming upon a semi, don't let yourself get annoyed that you're by this truck that's blocking you from making your progress. Tell yourself that you're in a danger zone and that you need to know that that truck driver hopefully is going to be safe. But there are a lot of truck drivers who are trying to find their way. They're maybe behind in their route. They're concerned about other things than you. So protect yourself. Beyond that, in our cases where we're able to show that the truck driver is at fault, I mean, the list is really endless in terms of how these drivers can make a mistake. I mean, these trucks are hard to operate. There are blind spots. They're very heavy. If they have to stop, they need way more time to stop. There's all kinds of cases we've had where traffic gets backed up and because of a construction zone or something else has happened on the road, and a truck driver's coming in and hauling at a pretty good rate of speed and doesn't realize that to stop in time and can't stop in time, and then bashes into the back of our client and other cars around our client. So we've had that case many times over again. So stopping issues are certainly a common occurrence. Also weather conditions. Semi-truck drivers are under great pressure to get their jobs completed and to get the freight delivered, and that pressure really doesn't stop when the rainstorm comes in or the snow comes in, and so they keep on trucking, as they say. And as they keep on trucking, they don't then realize that, okay, these conditions mean I need to drive slower. And going back to the federal motor carrier regulations, there are actually provisions that say that you need to drive slower when the weather conditions are adverse. So unfortunately, when the bad weather comes in, the truck drivers sometimes don't adapt as they should. And going back to the danger zone concept for drivers, if you're driving by a semi truck in the rain, that's even more dangerous. So slow up and take your time. So there's all kinds of ways in which semi-truck drivers can fail to use reasonable care. And it's just a function of the fact that they're operating these big vehicles, they're under this pressure, and some of them aren't that experienced. There's also that issue, like driver training. We can pursue these claims against the driver, but there's actually, in many cases, even more compelling story about how the truck company didn't do what it should do to make sure that this driver knew the rules of the road, and the truck company didn't hold the driver accountable enough to upholding the standards, and maybe even encourage the driver to not follow the standards in the sake of more profits for the trucking company. So
Absolutely.
Those are all kinds of examples of how we pursue fault in these cases.
And what you said about sort of referring to it as a danger zone when you're driving alongside one of these vehicles really resonates with me, because I was actually sideswiped because I was in a blind spot for a commercial vehicle. And luckily I walked away with, just a concussion and some big damage to the vehicle. But you start thinking about this and you want to sort of tell everybody it's our job to be careful as well. So I want to shift to something practical and talk about what everyday drivers can do to stay safe around large trucks, and what you want Michigan drivers to remember, especially when they're around these commercial trucks.
Yeah, and I generally touched on this before, but to get more specific about it, let me give an example of how you can be more safe as you approach the danger zone of a semi-truck, getting to your experience of getting sideswiped. So you're coming upon a truck and you don't want to be behind the truck. That's understandable. So you go to pass the truck. At that point, you should understand that you are entering even a greater danger zone, because for at least several feet there, you might be in the truck's blind spot. They say that the trucks are made these days without a blind spot, but in our experience, in order for there not to be a blind spot, the truck driver really has to be looking at everything from a certain angle. And a lot of times they don't. They just keep trucking, and you are coming up along the side and you're expecting them to see you.
Right.
The rule I'm trying to get across to drivers is expect them not to see you.
Mm-hmm.
And then you don't want to engage in speeding, but once you have a clear path to get by the truck, get by the truck, right? Don't just, slow it up while and drive alongside the truck. Make your move and then figure out if you have the clear path to just charge forward and get beyond the truck, knowing that while you're doing that, you need to be vigilant to see if the truck might be, veering over into your lane, trying to make a lane change. So just get by the truck. The other thing is, when you are stopping for a situation on the highway, one thing I always try to do in my own driving is, as I'm approaching a traffic backup, I start pumping my brakes, because that causes your brake lights to flash. It also allows your car to kind of slow down in a more gradual way. So you pump your brakes as you're slowing up. That tells the vehicle behind you, it's almost like a flashing red light to them. And then the other thing is, slow up before you have to. You can see that you're going to have to slow up, so you're going to have to. And at that point, start slowing up before you really need to avoid a crash. Right. And then, as a related matter, when you are coming upon a traffic backup, give yourself several feet before the vehicle in front of you. You're going to stop there. The drivers behind you might be annoyed that you're not going bumper to bumper, but when you have some space in between you and the next car, if something like a semi truck were to come up and bash into the back of you or back in the car behind you and force everybody forward, at least you'll have some space to not then have the front end of your car smash into the vehicle in front of you. We've had a number of cases where the person's hit from behind, they were injured or would have been injured by that alone, but the injury is much worse because they then slam into the vehicle in front of them. So that's another way you can protect yourself. The thing is, and there's been all kinds of studies about this, that when we think in our mind that driving faster, leaving less space in between us and the vehicles in front of us, that all that somehow gets us anywhere quicker, it really doesn't. I mean, right. You could talk about a few seconds, but you are not going to save yourself time by deciding to drive less safe. Like
Hmm.
being a safe driver is not going to result in you getting to your destination that much less. It's going to result in you getting to your destination safely and not getting injured. So be patient is, I guess, the bottom line.
Let's say a crash does happen. One thing we often hear attorneys discuss is preserving evidence. Why is that so important in truck accident cases?
Well, hey, here's the deal. I would like to think we're in a world where people can get injured and take their time to get representation and, just pursue it as they can, while they
Mhm.
deal with their medical treatment. Uh, and in some instances, they can go about things that way. In a semi truck accident, though, you can't, because the semi truck company, and more so the insurance companies that insure them, are very concerned about liability. So they have what are known as rapid response teams, which are teams of investigators and lawyers and insurance adjusters. They get involved even before they know that somebody's retained an attorney. They're getting out ahead and trying to get everything they possibly can. And let me emphasize something I haven't said during this interview yet. The other thing that makes these cases so much different in terms of what we can do for people, it's not just that there are different rules and different theories of liability. It's that under the law, these truck companies have to have greater insurance coverage than a typical vehicle. And that's a good thing. That means that there's
Right.
more money that we can pursue for our clients and make a difference for their life going forward as injured people. But that also means that the insurance company is concerned about how much money they're going to have to pay out. So they send these rapid response teams and they get all the information they possibly can. They talk to the police officers as soon as they can. And so when we are talking to people about retaining our firm for a semi truck crash case, we do tell them that time is of the essence because this information is being sought out by the other side. And then to get more back to your specific question, there's event data, a recorder in these trucks that show how fast the truck was going. There are cell phone records. There are other pieces of data that don't last forever unless you preserve it. And so part of getting involved right away is to investigate, understand what happened, and preserve the information. So
Hmm.
these cases are unique in that regard that you need to pursue your rights right away and getting your own lawyer and getting things underway as soon as you can is in your best interest.
When you're in an accident like this, the adrenaline is so strong, and I think sometimes you just can't think straight. So, can you remind us, what are some of the first things we should do if we're in a collision involving a truck?
Well, it starts with the basics. Look after yourself at the scene, right? If you know you're injured, then be communicated with people around you about the fact that you're injured and that you need medical care, and that's your primary focus at the crash scene. And as far as law enforcement investigating these crashes at the scene, they obviously should be mindful of your injured state, and in my experience, they typically are. But they also are trying to investigate the crash, and they're trying to talk to people about what happened. So know that if you're at a scene of one of these crashes, law enforcement is going to try to talk to you. If they can't talk to you there, they might come up to your hospital room and talk to you. There's nothing wrong with talking to law enforcement. You just need to understand that what you're saying to them is there's a record of it, right? And you're not going to be able to erase that record. It's there. So you need to be careful with what you say, make sure it's accurate.
Hmm.
The other thing is in terms of talking to other people, you do have a general obligation to talk to your own insurance company because in a semi truck crash, if you're driving your own vehicle, you do have no fault benefit rights that you pursue from your own insurance company for your medical care and your lost wages. And those benefits are important. And so the way the Michigan no fault law works is you get those benefits from your own insurance company. That's why they're called no fault benefits. They're payable regardless of fault. So you need to talk to your own insurance company and cooperate. But the company you don't need to talk to is the insurance company for the truck, and they do try to talk to people. They'll call you up and say, "Hey, I'm so and so from this insurance company. I'm so sorry for your injuries. We're just trying to get some information. Do you mind if I talk to you? Do you mind if I give a or have this be a recorded statement?" And a lot of the times people say, "Okay, that sounds good to me. You sound like a friendly person." And boom, you're sitting there
Right.
talking to the insurance company that will eventually not want to pay the amount of money you deserve. So you don't have to talk to them. You can tell them that you are looking into your rights, that you are retaining an attorney or you may retain an attorney, and just know that you have no obligation to them. So You have to talk to some people like law enforcement, your insurance company. You don't have to talk to the other side. And then that's where getting a lawyer allows you to just tell, the other side, I got a lawyer, talk to them.
Yeah, that's great advice. Before we wrap up, I want to ask about one misconception. What is the biggest misunderstanding people have in your mind about semi-truck accidents?
One thing I'll say locally, and our firm's trying to do a better job at this, is to understand that there are firms here in the Lansing area that specialize in semi-truck crashes. And as far as I know, our firm has the most extensive experience doing that. And we pursue these cases with the ultimate diligence, and we really know what we're doing. There is an extremely competitive landscape out there when we look at all the advertising and all the law firms that reach out to people. And sometimes they do it in a way that violates the rules of ethics. They show up in your hospital room unannounced. They send you mailers that are basically solicitations, which they're not supposed to do. So if you're in a semi-truck accident, expect that you're going to get all kinds of information and ways in which you're bombarded by attorneys. And what you really need to do is take the time, even though need to move quickly, but you need to take the time and not move too quickly, so that you give yourself the comfort and give yourself the chance of picking the attorney that you think is going to be the best advocate for you. The attorney who's going to pursue your rights, who's going to do it compassionately, who's going to care about you, who's going to protect not just your rights against the semi-truck crash and the company involved, but also with respect to your no-fault benefits. So our firm has always tried to do that. I'm not trying to really give a plug here, but you asked the question, one thing that I want people to know, it's that if you're in a crash, you have a very important decision to make, and you're going to be bombarded with options. And it's not just the option on the billboards. It's not just the biggest firm out there. It's the people who you think you can really form a bond with, trust, and believe they're really going to look after your best interest and really care about you. That's what people who are injured in a semi-truck crash really need. That's going to be the combination that's going to get them the result and make them feel the most comfortable with the process.
I think that is the most important statement I've heard today. So thank you. Thank you for joining us and helping us better understand why semi-truck accidents are different and what Michigan drivers can do to stay safe around vehicles. If you'd like to learn more about commercial truck crashes, roadway safety, or other legal topics affecting Michigan families, you can visit sinusdramis.com. Thanks for listening to 517 in Your Business. We'll see you next time. And thank you, Stephen Sinas.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the 517 in Your Business podcast. Get to know local businesses better by reading 517 Business Magazine. Get your subscription at 517mag.com/subscribe.